I'm Larry Ray, President and CEO of American Manganese Inc., listed on the TSX Venture, ticker symbol AMY, A-M-Y, with proprietary patents in the U.S., China, and South Africa. Our focus is on recycling lithium-ion batteries for electric vehicles. China recently legislated the responsibility for recycling onto their electric vehicle manufacturers and importers. For more information, please visit AmericanManganeseInc.com or phone me, Larry Ray, at 778-574-4444.
Welcome to the Goddard Report. Comments made on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com are an expression of opinion only. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is Rafe Mair, former BC Cabinet Minister and Canada's longest-running #1 radio talk show host and the most prominent political commentator in Lions Bay, BC. Welcome to the show, Rafe.
Always a pleasure, Jim, as you know.
I've been taking a look at your website and one of your headlines. How does oil-boosting Post-Media boss Paul Godfrey get into the News Hall of Fame?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, this is really something. For some of your listeners who may not know, Post-Media, which owns the National Post, the Province of Sun, and about 14 other newspapers across Canada, and then 24 Hours and lots of community newspapers, has a deal with the oil industry, with the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers, whereby they kiss their backsides by a deal, by contract. And if anybody wants the copy of all of that, Rafe at rafeonline.com, and I'll be glad to send it to you. I don't know that I was the one that exposed it, but I certainly have been exposing that and the deal that Mr. Godfrey's Vancouver province has made with a group called ResourceWorks to toot the horn for wood fiber LNG. I mean, here is Mr. Godfrey heading up a fading, falling empire, laying off people all over the place, crying the blues about money. He takes a $400,000 bonus last year, would you believe, Jim, and then sails into the news what do they call it? Not broadcast, News Hall of Fame. I mean, this is absolutely unbelievable. I mean, they might as well put the head of the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers in the same Hall of Fame. And he is probably as much to blame for the collapse of the newspaper industry in Canada as anybody else. And into the Hall of Fame he goes. And well, I laugh because it's so extraordinary. Only the newspaper industry could do that.
Well, I wonder, he's in the News Hall of Fame. What stories did he break? I don't remember any game-changing scoops that he came up with.
Well, I gather this. I don't know. I'm being a little facetious here, and I'm sure listeners will forgive me if I say I rather suspect that in one of the better clubs in Toronto, sitting around of an evening sipping gin, they decide who of their fellows should belong in the Hall of Fame. I belong, and I say this seriously, I belong to the Broadcasters Hall of Fame, and I'm very, very proud of that. The people that are in that, I can't believe that I'm lucky enough to be associated with them. And it's the same with the Hutchison Award at the Jack Webster's. I look at who's there with me or who I'm with, and it's just incredible. Now, I took a look at some of the people in the News Hall of Fame, and I must admit I didn't recognize all of them, but I certainly didn't see a hell of a lot of people there that really were top-notch journalists that broke big stories, etc. And if they did, they were lonely, I can tell you.
Well, was Mike Duffy in there?
Well, I didn't look hard enough for that, but I'll tell you right now, just for fun, I bet you Bucky is. Yes,
well, he seemed to be pretty good at trying to work his way up the ladder and ending up in the Senate because he was great at bashing Stephon Dion.
Well, that's right. And, I certainly have no quarrel with hard-hitting journalists getting into the Hall of Fame, even if I disagree with them heartily on everything they write, as long as they keep the basic ethics of journalism and come to my porch every morning with a newspaper that is not tied in with one of the people they're supposed to be reporting on fairly and without interest. as long as they're not doing that, that's just fine. I mean, hell, I was in government in the days when Jack Webster and Marjorie Nichols and Alan Fotheringham and Alan Garr and these guys were thumping the hell out of us every day, and I didn't like it very much, and I'm sure if you'd asked me in those days, should these guys get into the Hall of Fame, I'd have gagged. But the fact of the matter, they should, and they did, because they were superb journalists, and just because I didn't like it didn't mean they were not any good. But those are the kind of people you expect to see in a Hall of Fame, and it's the same in the broadcasting industry, and it's the same with Jack Webster. You expect to see people that have distinguished themselves in their profession by practicing it properly. Now, I hesitate to include myself in there, but that's why I feel so proud of being there.
Going into BC politics, Premier Christy Clark, does she have a ministry of silence? The RCMP investigation into the automatic deletion of emails that are supposed to be kept for historical records, if for nothing else.
Well, I just can't believe that she's got away with this, and I can't believe that nobody's had to resign over this. It's absolutely incredible, Jim. And, here I'm afraid you really get me to the point of being apoplectic because, and I hope listeners will understand, I was there in government, and I know what the obligations were, and I know what we did, and I know what the NDP did before us. I knew them all. Things that they did all went into the archives. And I can remember Gary Locke. We were giving him hell over some policy he brought in, which we thought was pretty damn stupid, wanted him to give it to us. He said, I'm not going to go give it to you. Go get it in the archives. That's where it is. And, of course, it was all there. Everything was recorded. Everything was kept. Now, this business is just unbelievable. Now, we didn't have emails then, I must confess, but this business is just absolutely unbelievable. And just to make this point, Jim, think how much easier it is to keep records with computers than it was in our day when it was all paper. And they can't even do that. It's just bloody awful. It really is. The other thing that puzzles me, Jim, if you opened up everything in that government except perhaps personnel matters, if you opened up everything, it would only be a matter of a week or two after the curious people say, oh, to hell with it, that's not that much fun, let's go get something else, let's go read the comic strips or something. Those things are only really critical because they're hidden. If they were out in front and people could debate them out in front and get the issues out and get the various sides of the argument out, then there would be no great excitement to it. But these guys are scared stiff that they might do something that brings opprobrium on their heads, and they just don't want to do that. It's well, as I say, it's a police matter as far as I'm concerned.
Well, the RCMP is checking into it. Kirsty Clark saying, well, this is we just have a different interpretation of the Privacy Act than what the Privacy Commissioner has.
Well, they have a difference of opinion on the Privacy Act as to what ordinary people think about Privacy Acts. If you went to the average person on the street and said, do you keep records in your business? They'd say, of course we do. And if you asked, do you see them, they'd probably say no. But if you showed them an act that said they had to do it, they'd reluctantly do it. They'd obey the law. These people, they're absolutely, utterly lawless. It's an incompetence, frankly, Jim, that in now a very long life I've never seen the likes of.
Well, when they say we have a different interpretation, I guess the same thing would happen if she came to a stop sign and goes right through it. I just have a different interpretation of what stop means.
Well, exactly. It spills out into policy. We now find that the LNG policy that her government has, is now going to really mess up the global warming position that she and Canada takes. And here gets back, we're getting a lot of stories in one place here, Jim. This goes back to Paul Godfrey and his papers. If you go to the post-media papers, the Sun and the Province, I haven't looked at the National Post, you'll see an item about BC's hopes for climate, for the cutting down of carbon in the atmosphere for 2020 being way out of whack, and we won't be able to meet them. End of story. It's just a very short couple of paragraphs. Why is that so? That's because they're going to produce LNG, which we now know is just as bad, just as full of carbon and so on as coal. And this is why, and they're not being reported on it. And you think about that for a second, Jim. Here we have a government that is bleating that it has a carbon tax and it's all for getting the carbon out of the atmosphere, etc., which it can't wait to produce stuff that's just as bad as coal and sell as much of it as they possibly can and pretend that that's all right. I mean, it's the whole thing. Let's talk about something else, because I really do get apoplectic when I think about this. The incompetence is bad enough, but the damage that it's done is just unbelievable.
What about the Site C Dam, a $9 billion project that's now underway? I've had experts tell me this is going to be a giant white elephant because every year power consumption in BC is falling. It's not going up.
I can tell you, Jim, this goes back a long way. When I was in office, Site C was there as a project to be done, and I followed it very closely from then till now. I have not seen anybody other than BC Hydro say they're going to need Site C. Now, BC Hydro has a long history of overestimating its needs. I mean, this was something we laughed at in Cabinet when they came in with their needs for the year. I mean, you could almost mathematically cut it in half or cut a third out or whatever it was because they'd always overestimated. So they've done that. And this would be their little private game, so it's something they've always liked, and they could look at something and say, my God, I'm going to be around when the new Bennett Dam plus is built. But the fact is, you're absolutely right. You talk to the experts in this matter, and they'll tell you, we do not need this power, and there has never been a time in the last 30 years when we could honestly say we were going to need that power. And now that we have finally discovered conservation and finally discovered all sorts of other ways to get power, and just made this immense discovery that we don't have to get it all from one source, we can have 4 or 5 different sources contributing. Now we've got to that stage. What are we doing? We're building this gigantic boondoggle, a white elephant, that even worse than that is destroying agricultural land and is virtually wiping out a community, not to mention what they're doing to First Nations and their hunting rights and so on and so forth. And then to go even further now, when the people have risen and lawsuits are starting and so on, what does Hydro do? It gets started spending a whole bunch of money on it in advance. You know, when you put me on the show like this, you're going to have to bring me around a drink or something to calm me down. It really is appalling, you know. And I got sort of involved in the whole electric thing a few years ago when this Run of Rivers thing came along, and I had to talk to some great people like Eric Anderson and so on, just to get brought up to date as to what we need and what we didn't need. And it was quite obvious that Site C was just absolutely unnecessary.
We'll have more with Rafe Mair right after the break.
I'm Larry Ray, President and CEO of American Manganese Inc., listed on the TSX Venture, ticker symbol AMY, A-M-Y, with proprietary patents in the U.S., China, and South Africa. Our focus is on recycling lithium-ion batteries for electric vehicles. China recently legislated the responsibility for recycling onto their electric vehicle manufacturers and importers. For more information, please visit AmericanManganeseInc.com or phone me, Larry Ray, at 778-574-4444.
More and more people are looking to the internet for intelligent, riveting, and thought-provoking interviews. To advertise on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com, call 604-699-8600, 604-699-8600.
In Goddard we trust.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Rafe Mair. Rafe, I'm looking at Prime Minister Justin Trudeau as kind of a promise keeper. It seems he's done about a promise a day since he's been elected, stopping community mailboxes going in, giving refugees full medical coverage again. Although, I mean, he promised to have 25,000 Syrian refugees in the country by the end of the year. Now, a more practical guidelines been put out for that, but he's still going to follow through with his promise there. Is he going to be one of those few prime ministers who said, I made 175 promises and so far you can check off about 20 of them?
Well, it's interesting you should ask that because I've just finished doing 2 projects One was taking Mark Hume's marvelous article on the 29th out of the Globe and Mail on water and what the Tories did to the water, and with the various different acts that they amended and the damage they've done to the fish and so on. And at the same time, I've just finished an article for the Common Sense Canadian, are the wheels going to come off the Trudeau administration? Can they go on like this forever? Promise, etc. And it's a hell of an interesting question. If you go back in history, every new government has a honeymoon, and every honeymoon ends, and a lot of them end very, very nastily, including Justin's own father, Pierre. He was the most popular guy in the world in 1968, and by the time of the 1972 election, he was very, very lucky to hang on to office. So to answer your question, I don't think he can possibly keep all these promises. But you know, when you examine them, Jim, most of them are not high monetary things. You know, when you change the Environment Act, change the Fisheries Act, change these various things, they are not huge ticket items. The decision to postpone the refugees, I think, was a sensible one, and I think most people think it was sensible too. And it's not costing a hell of a lot of money that, you know, was not going to be spent. Still in all, there is a lot of money coming out of Trudeau's mouth, and we'll have to see whether or not he can make good. But, you know, the day will come when there will be an actual opposition in Parliament. Even the bloody newspapers in this country will start to pay attention to what he is doing. He'll have cabinet ministers that'll screw up. He'll have to explain. One or two of them will run off with somebody else's wife or husband or something, and that'll have to, you know, the various things that inevitably happen as the government unfolds. And the way to judge, I think, the Trudeau government is not based on how we all look at him now in the honeymoon, but how it's going to be when things logically happen. Now, very quickly, having said that, I am delighted he's there. Just to be rid of Harper, I think Jack the Ripper would have been welcome. But I'm very happy to see Trudeau there. I think he's bright. He won an election by doing what the others couldn't do, was running a good election. I feel a little sorry for Mulcair because he lost by being a man of decent character over the niqab issue. But at the end of the day, Trudeau won the election, and I'm glad he's there, and I'm glad Harper's gone. But to think he's not going to run into a lot of trouble meeting his promises is naive. And as you're pointing out, he's not just going in with the promises you usually have from new prime ministers. He's got so many you can't keep count of them.
Well, one thing that I'm looking forward to him doing is Dr. Julio Montana, who came up with the modern AIDS treatment that for most people now with HIV, they'll live a normal lifespan. He's developed the medications to keep them alive. And he said the next big step Canada has to make is have people tested for AIDS every time they are admitted to hospital, because he said up to 20% of people who have the virus don't know they have it. And so the Harper government said, we're against it because we believe that would spread AIDS. And Trudeau signed a little agreement with them, just, you know, as a little promise between two friends that he would bring that policy in. Like, again, night and day between the former government and this one.
Well, there is. There's no question about that. Now, I think that what Trudeau has and his part of the Liberal Party have is a kind of a modern approach to things in the sense that he still believes in that, you know, you should go with the times, and when you've got things come along that are going to help, you should take advantage of it, etc. Whereas Harper was definitely an old-time conservative, don't change anything, and if anything, go backwards. There's no question about it. There's the two of them are very, very different. There's one thing, though, that worries me a little bit about this AIDS business. I think, obviously, it's a good idea to stop AIDS and cure AIDS, whatever you can do. I worry a little bit, though, about hospitals, one after the other, starting to test people for everything they feel like testing them for because they think it might be a positive test. And there's a civil liberties thing involved in there a little bit, I think, Jim, if you think about it. And there's also a cost factor. Now, with AIDS, I agree. I mean, it is such a terrible scourge. It is so fatal. It hits little kids and so on and so forth. And I agree. But I just think we ought to watch carefully and make sure that we're not going to force people to be tested for measles and everything else imaginable because they happen to go in a hospital to get their arm fixed. So, there's that to it. But I think, the difference you're saying between Trudeau and Harper is shown very distinctly there. I mean, Harper, I'm sure in the back of his mind still thinks, oh my God, that's dirty homosexuals are causing all that kind of stuff. We're not going to do anything to help those guys. Whereas Trudeau is taking the very modern approach. Who cares how people have sex as long as they do it voluntarily? And if there's an outfall from it, whether it be venereal disease or whatever other sexually transmitted disease it may be, that we have to look after them. That's part of what society has always done. And just because this is a new disease and it happens not always, but more to people who have different sex habits than our mother and father had, is no reason not to treat them and try to, better than that, try to prevent the disease.
Well, I understand too. Montreal now is looking at setting up 3 supervised injection sites, just like Vancouver has one. And I know other cities wanted to do the same thing, but the federal health department wouldn't let them. Again, a brighter, I think, more intelligent approach to this.
Well, I give full marks to my old friend Philip Owen. I just started talking with his family not long ago about my book. Because they're in my book. We go back such a long way to Jack and Jill kindergarten and so on. But here is Philip, grew up in the very, very best part of Vancouver, father, the lieutenant governor of the province, very prominent lawyer, money, all the rest of that stuff. The last person in the world you would think of that would pioneer this treatment, and he did it, and there's no question about it. He didn't feel that way to start with, but he saw what was supposed to happen, and unlike Harper, when he saw something that was right, he changed and he did it. And I think Vancouver has demonstrated, for all the downers, there are bound to be downers when you have people injecting drugs and so on. For all the downers, it's a hell of a lot better than it was. It's an improvement on the previous situation, a lot better than policemen having to chase guys just for shooting heroin. And the other cities are now coming on board, and I think that's a good thing.
The Kitsilano Coast Guard base is going to reopen. It was closed, they say, to save $750,000 a year, which, of course, in Vancouver won't even buy you a doghouse. I think it was closed down because it was in liberal heady riding, or
Hetty Fry's riding.
Hetty Fry's riding. Yeah. Yes.
Well, when you look back at some of the things the conservatives did, and I think of that particularly, I go back to the days when that was the liberals, I guess, that shut the lighthouses. And I look at the question of the missing Aboriginal women. There are some things, Jim, that politically you just have to do. Now, I don't mean that in a nasty sense. I mean politically in the sense of government is supposed to help and look after people that are in trouble. There are some things that just jump out at you. Look, you have to do that. And with this business with the Coast Guard, same thing. You can't close that sort of thing. And if you do close it, you've got to fix it up very, very quickly. And I think these kind of things show where a government's heart and mind are. And, of course, Trudeau's got to open it very, very quickly. It was one of the stupidest things I think the Conservatives ever did, and that's covering a lot of ground. It probably cost James Moore his political career because he became so unpopular about it, although I understand there were other reasons than that. So it was a dumb thing to do for them, and, well, there you are. It's now being repaired, and so it should.
Of course, I'm wondering if the Salmon Management Office will be returning to Vancouver because Harper moved it to Winnipeg and Brampton.
Oh, of course. Put them where the salmon are the furthest possible away. I mean, it's a wonderful idea. It's like having us manage the East Coast cod and having Halifax manage our salmon. We've talked about this before, Jim. The Pacific salmon and the Pacific fishery generally, but particularly the salmon, has been a political pain in the ass to the federal government since we came into the country in 1871. It never has any good news. It's always got grief, etc. So the federal government has just, when they haven't ignored it, they've waded in and made them a hell of a mess of things. And I hope that the Liberal government, first of all, by getting Mr. Tutu, somebody who knows something about fish, my God, what a thing to do. Somebody that knows something about fish, knows something about environment and habitat and so on, putting him in as fisheries minister may be indicating they're going to change. I hope so. We've had almost no fisheries ministers that I can remember that had any really understanding of the fishery. Jack Davis was an exception, but he mucked up the business of, I don't really know the story, but he developed the theory there were too many boats chasing too few fish, so he cut back all the licenses on the boats and overlooked the fact that all the fishermen did was build bigger boats. And so that didn't work. But John Fraser, of course, another one that understood the fishery, but he wasn't there long enough really to have the kind of impact. Other than that, we've had people, mostly from Eastern Canada or Central Canada, have no idea. You couldn't get any of them to tell you the 5 major species of Pacific salmon, let alone all 7 or 8 if you include the one in Japan. You couldn't get them to even begin to do that, let alone where they are, where they spawn, what the habitat concerns are, and so on. You just haven't had that. Now, we've got a man now that I think gives us some hope that he's going to fully understand the situation and for once bring the federal government into the situation in a positive way instead of just making things worse.
Rafe, thanks a lot for chatting with us.
Oh, you didn't ask me about the Grey Cup. I was waiting for that.
Oh, well, Edmonton won, the West won, all is well in the world. It was a very entertaining game.
Well, I'm glad you told me because I didn't watch it.
Well, Rafe, I'm sure millions didn't, but
No, always nice to talk with you, Jim.
Thanks a lot for chatting with us.
Take care.
My guest has been Rafe Mair, former BC cabinet minister and Canada's longest-running #1 radio talk show host. You're listening to the Goddard Report on TalkDigitalNetwork.com. Find us on Twitter at TalkDigitalNet. Our popular YouTube channel is Talk Digital Network. Comments about the show can be emailed to info@HowStreet.com. I'm Jim Goddard.
Comments made on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com are an expression of opinion only. The Goddard Report is available online and mobile at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. The Goddard Report is a production of How Street Media Incorporated.